Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of the Red Haired Stokie. So this week we are talking about the Leopard in Burslem. I think if you're from Stoke or Staffordshire, I'm pretty confident that you know what the Leopard is. You've heard of it. You've probably drank in there at some point. But even if you haven't, I'd be very surprised if you haven't heard the name mentioned. Unfortunately, most people have heard the name mentioned because of the fire. It's been gutted. It's completely hollow shell now. But to a lot of us locally, we knew it more as a sort of central hub in Burslem. It's become synonymous with the town. And it has been for a good few hundred years. It's been a really important meeting place, a meeting of the minds for local businessmen, and even just somewhere to go and enjoy live music and, have a decent pint in recent years. But it ended, I think, how most heritage buildings in Stoke tend to end, and that was with fire. It's become a running joke in the city that when a building becomes empty for whatever reason, or when a developer that's not from Stoke-on-Trent buys it, they just rot into the floor, and then they end up being burnt, and then lo and behold, the same as with the Leopard now, they end up becoming flats or offices or something, and they've put a planning in for the Leopard to become flats. So we knew that was coming. But instead of looking forward today into what the Leopard might end up as, we're going to look back at what it was. And what we're going to look at is a real good thorough history of the Leopard. Now, this is also a blog post on my website, so if you do want to read more about this and you want to have a look at some of the pictures and the maps that I'm talking about, then head over to the redhairedstokie.co.uk, and it's called The Leopard Burslem, A Rich History to a Bitter End. And you can have a look at the blog post on there, and you can have a look at the maps and things like that. Now, the Leopard's been, like I say, it's been a social hub for over 300 years that we know of. And who do you blame about this sort of thing? Is it the council? Is it out-of-town developers buying it? Is it just a lack of money and funding in the area? We don't know. But what we do know is that it's not the first building to have this issue. And when I say the council, I don't mean the new council, because we can't really speak. Let's give them a fair shake. But previous councils over many, many years have really not cared about our heritage buildings. And that's why we're losing so many of them. Now, to talk about the history of the pub, we're going to go back into before the 1700s. And to do that, there's actually a map online. There's a man called Enoch Wood, and in 1816, he commissioned a map to be made of Burslem in and around like 1750 to 1759. He paid £3 to Mr. MacPhail to scale the town onto a sketch. And this map is actually based on the recollections of two local men, John Lovett and John Fletcher. And there was various others as well, who were probably about 80 years old at the time. And what Enoch Wood did is he did basically a pre-OS map. So if you go online and have a look at the map, there is a piece of it on my website that you can have a look at. But if you have a look at the full-size map, it really is an eye-opener, because Burslem was a totally different place in the 1700s. But the really interesting thing is it's actually got people's names on, and the building names and little drawings of what they were, so you can see where the pot banks were. There was like a little pool in the middle where the town hall is now. Fields and who they belonged to, pot banks and who they belonged to, houses, inns. It's really, really interesting map. So head over and have a look at that. And there aren't actually many early records of the pub. So what I found might not be 100% correct. It's not set in stone. And if anybody does have any earlier records, or if there is anything out there, I would love to see it. I would love to hear from you. But this is what I found out. So in 1711, Allen Wedgwood, with an E, she was female, was a distant cousin of Josiah Wedgwood. And she purchased the 2 cottages that were on either side of her cottage. Now, these cottages were built in the early 1600s, and she knocked both of them through, including her own, and created quite a large space, which she called the Leopard Inn. And on Enoch Wood's map of Burslem, you can actually see Allen's Leopard Inn, and it's comprised of 3 cottages, and it's actually marked on the map with a number 6. So when you go and have a look at the map, look at for number 6, and you'll see exactly where it is today is the Leopard Inn marked on this map in 1750 to 1759. So we know that there was a pub there then, and we know it was called the Leopard Inn. And we know from this record that the cottages were built in the early 1600s. So that's quite a span of time, isn't it? Let's be honest. It's one of the earlier buildings in Burslem when you look at how few buildings are on the map in the 1700s. So head back another 100 years, there can't have been many in the 1600s. So it's got to be one of the earliest buildings. So we know that in the 1700s it was already an inn, and we know that at this point in time it was a social hub. It was the only inn in Burslem according to the map, and in the mid sort of 1700s Wedgwood wrote a letter. It was actually in March 1765, and he wrote a letter, and in it he said that he met and dined with James Brindley in March. And in the letter it says, "On Friday last I dined with Mr. Brindley, the Duke of Bridgewater's engineer, after which we had a meeting at the Leopard on the subject of a navigation from Hull to Burslem." Of course he's talking about the canal, which was not a thing at this point. And this is probably the most famous thing about the Leopard. And it's well recorded, and there was a meeting between, it was Josiah Wedgwood, James Brindley, Erasmus Darwin, and Thomas Bentley. And these guys all sat in a Leopard, probably with a decent pint of beer, and they discussed creating the Trent and Mersey Canal. And the first sod of the canal was cut by Josiah Wedgwood in 1766, and Brindley carried it away in a wheelbarrow. And there used to be a plaque on the wall in the Leopard telling you all this. I don't know if it survived the fire. Now, as we trickle down in town, we come to like the 1800s, and there's a couple of nice pictures on the website. There's one of the Leopard Hotel in 1903, and you can see on this actual image, there's a coach entrance that leads to the stables. And records say that in the 1800s, it was actually a really busy coaching inn with stabling for over 50 horses. That's massive. So we know that it took up quite a lot of space, and we also know that the bedrooms at the back were a later addition, but we'll come on to that in a moment. So in the early 1800s, the Leopard was actually in quite a poor state, and it was owned by a vicar from Port Hill, who we assume must have taken it over after Allen. But its fortunes were soon to change, because in the 1830s, the inn had a complete new front put on, and it was given a new lease of life. And it actually became one of the major coaching houses in the area. And as well as being a coaching inn, it was also a coach station, a parcel depot, and a ticket office on the main Postcoach Express route, which went from London to Liverpool via the Potteries in Manchester. So we've gone from being a little inn to somewhere that the local businessmen meet, to being probably the biggest coaching inn in Stoke-on-Trent. I mean, this is on the main line from Liverpool to London. And it's not just a place that people stay when they come and, sleep over in the town for a night. This is the coach station. This is where the coach stops and stays, and the horses are looked after until the morning. It's where the parcels are sorted and the tickets are given out. That's quite an important place. And this importance as a coaching inn catapulted the Leopard into being probably the major social hub in the area. And if you look at the records at the time, it's really interesting to see that the local newspapers and adverts actually direct people to apply for jobs at the Leopard. So like if a local farmer needed a labourer, they'd say, needed a labourer at, say, Smith Farm, please apply via the Leopard. And correspondence was posted and collected there. I mean, we're talking about a time before Royal Mail. So if you needed to send a letter to somebody, you would write the letter and you would take it to the Leopard, and then it would go from the Leopard to wherever in the country that you needed it to go. And this importance of the Leopard led a lady called Mary Lees to purchase it in 1850. Now, Mary Lees was a widow of quite substantial means, and she owned a few other properties. And there is actually a little snippet in the Staffordshire Advertiser for a few years later that transfers the licence from Mary Lees to James Norris, who owned the brewery across the road, which we'll come on to in a minute. And it says, Monday being the day fixed by the county justices for the transfer of alehouse licences, the following public houses changed hands. The Leopard Inn, Burslem, from Mary Lees to James Norris, the Queen's Head, Burslem. And that's on, I think it's the 30th of March, 1872. Now, in 1857, there was a grand celebration to open the new town hall, which is the old town hall as we know it today. And Mary Lees was commissioned to create an incredible feast featuring 5-course meal and over 100 different dishes. There's a record of this in the newspaper, and I think that's absolutely incredible. So this was the main sort of party hub, I suppose. And at this point, it's still the coaching inn. So you've got the 3 cottages at the front. It's been extended, so it's all new frontage. I'm assuming another floor is put on top. I can't really see the cottages of the 1600s being 3 floors, but you never know. But I think the top floor might have been added at a later date. I can't find any record of it. But yeah, so they had this party for the town hall. And then a couple of years later, we had the creation of the Potteries Loop line. And that was another cause for celebration. And this celebration again was held in the Leopard. And the drinks were had to mark the cutting of the first sod by Mr. John Watkins, who was the chief bailiff at the time. And this was on Thursday, the 21st of July, 1870. Now you can see now that obviously, first of all, Mary Lees was obviously quite an important lady because she kept being given these really important jobs and hosting these really lavish and important parties. But also, the Leopard genuinely is the central hub for this area. If a crime's been committed and there's an inquest, it happens at the Leopard. Letter to post, send it from the Leopard. Parcel, send it to the Leopard. Auction, you're auctioning off some of your property or some of your household goods, the auction's held at the Leopard. Everything in the newspapers from the time points you to the Leopard. Now, in 1872, the Leopard was purchased by James Norris, who was a local brewer. Now, if you've ever seen any old photographs of Burslem, you'll notice that there was a massive building next to the town hall. So most people will remember the eyesore that was Ceramica at the lights in Burslem, where Time Team did the dig and found Wedgwood's old pot bank, the Ivy House. Now, the brewery was actually there. And on the other side of the road to the pub, he actually built this brewery and a bottling plant. So it just made good business sense to buy a pub that was so close to where he built his brewery. And it was actually James Norris who expanded the Leopard into the Lodge Hotel. And this is, I think, what most people will remember it as. So again, there's a photo on my website that I took in 2015. Because I was actually allowed on the roof of the Leopard when the scaffolding was on. So I went up and I took quite a lot of photos of Burslem and the Leopard from the roof. And you can see a couple of them on the website. And this was a massive extension that he put on the back. And it was 4 stories. and it was attached to the rear of the building, and he had 57 bedrooms spread across 3 floors. Now, to go from a 3-cottage inn to a coaching inn is a big one anyway. They must have a massive stables at the back. I can't find any record of how big the stables were. There was 50, so it must have been pretty big. But that was all removed, and this huge brick extension was put on the back. So the top 3 floors had 57 bedrooms, and they'd all got fireplaces, there was bathrooms, there was baths in there, big corridors, beautiful, beautiful building. And then the ground floor housed a large function room to cater to the guests. Now, many people in the local area, even people from outside the area, will remember the Leopard's function room. So you went through the pub at the front, past the beautiful staircase where you went down to the toilets and the beer garden, and into the back, which was the function room. It got a bar, it got a stage. There was loads of live music there over the years, performers. It was a brilliant, brilliant place. But the upstairs was so popular with people, and people came from all over the country to stay there. And the Leopard actually became such a popular hotel, bearing in mind it's gone from an inn to a hotel, that it actually became known as the Savoy of the North. And people were travelling from all over to come and stay at the Leopard. Now, there was so many famous people that came and stayed, including actually H.G. Wells came and stayed at the Leopard in 1888. And it was such a big and popular place, but unfortunately, the fame and fortune were not to last. So there was a fire. There was actually, it's not the first fire that the Leopards had, basically. And by 1901, the census shows that the licensee was a Mr. Thomas Amson and his wife Helena. And by this point, the hotel was still a social hub for the area. It was a good employer. The records show that there was loads of servants and workers living there on the census over the years. There were housemaids for the bedrooms, cooks, chefs, ostlers for the horses, because obviously there were still stables. There was waitresses, barmen, more. Because you've got to think, 57 bedrooms, stables, a big inn, a pub. They did food. At this point, it's still a coaching inn. There's so much going on there. But it obviously was not meant to last. And on the 4th of November in 1910, at about 2:30 in the afternoon, a fire was discovered by a local policeman on the beat. And at this time, when the fire occurred, the landlord was a Mr. George Popel, and he lived at the hotel with his wife, Bessie. And I did find a snippet from a newspaper called the Leominster News, and I'll read that to you now. It is on the website if you want to go and have a look at it. It says, "Hotel on fire, 5 women rescued from an upper window. Thursday night, an outbreak of fire, attended by scenes, occurred early this morning at the Leopard Hotel, Burslem. The fire was discovered about 2:30 by a policeman who was on his beat in the marketplace. He raised an alarm, and the fire brigade were on the scene within 5 minutes. Before their arrival, however, the flames had spread to the staircase and had cut off the escape of 5 maids and a commercial traveller who were driven to the upper rooms. Mr. Popel, the landlord, with several other commercial travellers, had already escaped by the stairs, scantily clothed. One of the travellers, who was clad only in his shirt, rushed through the smoke at great risk of suffocation, but a barman, who also escaped through the flames, was badly burnt. The flames had made considerable headway before adequate help arrived, and the terror-stricken maids had assembled at one of the upper windows in such a condition of panic that they were actually preparing to leap into the street when the fire escape arrived. With all possible speed, the ladders of the escape were run up against the window, and the rescue worker Fireman Phillips, who attended one of them, was watched with breathless interest by the crowd which had assembled. Phillips succeeded in calming the women, who were then wrapped in blankets and carried safely to the ground. Shelter was afterwards found for them in the police station. 5 women and 1 man were rescued by the escape, and the man, a commercial traveller, was the last to leave. Considerable damage was done before the fire was subdued." So it seems it was quite a bad fire, but it also doesn't seem like it destroyed the pub. And the census in 1911 listed a few different people. So we got George and Bessie. We got a guy who was a motor engineer, a barmaid, a waitress, a chambermaid, a cook, maid, kitchen maid, staff, barman, and one says hotel boots. I don't know if he was maybe a boot cleaner. It doesn't really say. But yeah, so the fire had sped quickly, and everyone managed to get out alive. But there was considerable damage done to the building before the fire was put out. And then as time sort of trickles on, there is a little nugget in the Sentinel in 1947 that on the 18th of April, a chap called Colonel Wilfred Barrett Green was fined for having no lights on his car, but the address that he gave is the Leopard. Now, Captain Green, as he was later known, was actually a very well-known person in Burslem. He was a World War I flying ace, and he was credited with 7 aerial victories. He was born and bred in Burslem, and he is the second son of Thomas Seaman and Louisa Green. Now, his father was a grocer, a baker, and a provision dealer, and he was also a member of the Borough Council. And after the war, and after his father's death, he also became a councillor, and he also became the managing director of the family business, which was Messrs T.S. Green and Sons Limited. And he was quite a prominent figure in Burslem. And census of the time shows him and his family living in Nile Street at the time. So I can't quite figure out why he was staying at the Leopard and why he wasn't staying at home. Because there's no records showing that he owned it or that he lived there. So we can only assume that he was staying there temporarily. But the snippet in the Sentinel actually says road offences for causing motor vehicles to be on the road during darkness without 2 white lights at the front and a red rear light. A fine of 10 shillings each were imposed on Charles Vote of Trentview, Southland Stone, and Colonel Wilfred Barrett Green of the Leopard Hotel, Burslem. And there is, in the Sentinel in September 1947, his obituary. It explains, I mean, you can go on the website and read it. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. But it basically says that he served in 2 world wars. He was the managing director of the Grocers, member of the North Staffordshire Aero Club, and that he was in the Home Guard. It tells you a lot about him. And he was obviously quite a well-to-do bloke. I can't figure out for the life of me why he was staying in the Leopard when he lived just up the road. I couldn't figure it out. So yeah, by this point now we're sort of in the 50s. So by 1956, the hotel had declined in popularity, and there was just no use for all the bedrooms at the back. I don't know if it was because of the war, but there was just not enough people staying there. So the decision was made to close the bedrooms off at the back to save money on like heating and lighting, and just go back to using the front rooms as bedroom. Although they did keep the ground floor open, which was the function room. So I can only assume it was because of the war, because of rationing, because a lot of men had died in both of the wars. There mustn't have been as many people travelling around the country. And once he'd sealed these bedrooms off at the back, they were kind of forgotten about. And Bass Breweries purchased the pub in 1965 and renovated the restaurant downstairs, rebranding it as the Arnold Bennett Suite. And they also revamped the pub, and it did give it a completely new lease of life. And the restaurant was called the Arnold Bennett Suite right up until the end. Now, on 19th of April 1972, the Leopard was actually granted listed status. So it became Grade 2 listed building. And it was listed at the Leopard Public House, 21 Marketplace. So it wasn't officially known as the Leopard Inn anymore. It was just a public house. But the Leopard sprung to fame again. I think most people, like my generation, We just knew it as a pub. It was just a pub. It was a nice pub. It was lovely, you know. There was always bands on in the function room. The beer was good. The food was good. And it was just another pub. We knew it was historical, but we didn't know a lot about it. But it sprung to fame again in 2007 when the owner at the time, Neil Crisp, rediscovered the 50-odd bedrooms at the back that had just been forgotten about. And I have no idea how they were forgotten about for so long, because you can clearly see from outside. But I don't know, I don't know if it was boarded off or if they didn't think it was part of the building that they owned as part of the pub. But anyway, he reopened them and they were found pretty much in the state that they were left in, obviously in a worse condition, but they were just exact, and they were like a time warp. And if you go on to the website, in fact, most of the pictures that you've probably seen from upstairs are probably my photos, because I've been upstairs a couple of times and photographed the whole thing, from the fireplaces to the, you know, the print on the wall. There was it's even got like all the wallpapers still on, the flowery wallpaper. The toilets had still got the Victorian toilet paper in. So I photographed all of this, luckily, so we could all remember it. And the plan was to reopen the rooms and create a hotel again. But the cost was too high and the plans never went ahead. Can't imagine the council were much help with it. The parking in Burslem was pretty crap. I don't know if they would have ever recouped the money from turning it back into a hotel, but the pub certainly did well. And the pub actually went internationally famous with these rooms, because in 2007 it was actually featured on Most Haunted. For those of you that have never watched it, Most Haunted is a very popular television show about ghost hunting, and it was a multi-part episode that showed the ghost hunters staying in the pub, in the basement, in the abandoned rooms, because there's been reports over years of ghosts, and this exposure led to a massive rise in popularity. There was ghost hunts all the time. People came from all over the country to have ghost hunts there and to dine and drink at the pub and even stay overnight in the derelict rooms in the cellar. And there was tunnels, and again, there's I've put photos on the website. We don't know what the tunnels were for. We don't know where they went. Were the original from like the 1600s, 1700s? Were they put in to go to the brewery across the road? That doesn't really make any sense. So I don't think we'll ever know the answer, but there was loads of tunnels marked out on the walls. And so many people wanted them to be reopened, but they never were. But yeah, so Most Haunted genuinely fired this thing into the sky, and the pub was once again a social hub for the area. And it became really, really well known for its good food, friendly staff. A lady called Sharon Crisp took it over, and it became a great live music venue. There was always things on at the weekend, you know, local bands, musicians, comedians, parties. The function room had always got something going on. And the pub enjoyed years then of being a warm and welcoming place once again. And then in 2013, there was a £1 million project to restore the Leopard, including the roof, structural repairs, historical fabric restoration, and the floor space. And the Leopard actually had, I think it was about £215,000 invested into it, which is actually when I went onto the roof. I went onto the roof then and took some pictures. And then I went onto the roof and the scaffolding of Burslem Town Hall a few years later, after it had been done. And there's photos from that as well. I don't think I've shared them on the post though, so I'll have to put them back up. So you can see over the years that it's just been up and down. But it went back down again. So the pandemic in 2020 and the fact that Burslem's nightlife sort of petered out, and a lack of funding for shops and facilities, just meant that unfortunately the Leopard just never reopened again. And Sharon had run the pub for years. She loved the history of the pub. She loved the paranormal activity. And I don't think there's anyone that can say that she didn't give it a really good go. But there's only so much you can do. And unfortunately, the the doors closed permanently. And it doesn't really get much better from there, unfortunately. So in 2021, the pub was sold to a developer, which is Denitz Investments Limited. They bought it for $222,000 in January 21. Now, from what I can find, they are based in Cheadle-Hulme in Stockport. They've got two directors who are directors of another company. And according to the website, it's an experienced and proven property developer in the Northwest, which covers every aspect of property developing, from sourcing, buying, planning applications to full refurbishment, lettings and sales. Now, the plan was, apparently, to restore the rooms in the back and convert them into luxury apartments and to reopen the pub at the front with a new licence. Now, that would have really been a brilliant thing. It would have been great. However, there's a couple of issues. One, where would you have parked everybody if they were all apartments? There's only 3 parking spaces behind there. And two, I don't really understand where they were going to make the money back from, because the pub can only make so much money, and it's a grade 2 listed building. I think we all just know, don't we, that was probably never going to happen. And because of this, and because people knew that it wasn't going to happen, there was an application by the community group Burslem, which was approved by the council in February 21, meaning that the building was marked as an asset of community value, which was actually the first pub in Stoke-on-Trent to be given that title. Didn't work though, because in January 2022, the police officers in the area found a large cannabis farm in the pub. And they said, oh, it's a significant fire risk to the pub and its neighbouring buildings. Well, never was a truer word spoken, because that was on the 17th of January, and on the 22nd of January, there was a massive fire. And I mean a massive fire. It literally just destroyed it. It was burning for hours. And there was something like over 40 firefighters tackling the fire. And the building it's just destroyed. It's in a complete state of ruin. Will it be saved? Will it be demolished? It's probably going to sit empty and roofless for another 10 years before they have to knock it down, because it's not safe, and they end up with some horrible grey office building in the place. I mean, I hope it can be saved. Our city doesn't really have a very good track record when it comes to building like this, but I think it's not ever going to be a pub again. And I don't know if any of you have actually been up and had a look at the state, or if you've seen the photographs, you just have to Google it. You can see the state of it now. The back is completely destroyed. But even if you can't save the pub and you can't save the building at the back, I think we should be fighting to save the facade, to save the front. Because the front is actually the bit that we all know. It's the street. It's iconic. And as much as I would love for it to be a pub again, I don't think it's ever going to be. I don't think there's enough calling for pubs like that anymore. There's definitely no room in Burslem for a hotel. I think there's room for housing, and I think there's room for office spaces. So maybe we could, I don't know. There's a factory in Cliff Vale. You'll notice it if you've driven down Etruria towards Newcastle. It's on the left-hand side. It was old Cliff Vale pottery factory. And they knocked down nearly the entire factory, but they kept the front. And they kept the front, they kept the carriageway, they kept the ticket booth, and they just built houses behind it, and they built apartments behind it. But when you drive down that road, the front of that factory is still standing. And I think that is the key, is to keep the architectural merit of the building, but embrace the fact that it's not going to be used for what it was. And I think the same can be said of the big house in Burslem. The fact that that's sat empty for so long is shocking to me, when it's a perfect place for offices. It's a perfect place for a shop or a studio. But this is the problem when these private companies own them and do nothing with them. But now that the leopard's been wrecked, after 300-400 years of amazing history, there is a planning permission to just turn it into housing. But they're not going to turn the building that's there now into housing. They're going to have to demolish it because it's unsafe. And that's what I can't stand. They wreck these buildings. They don't look after them to destroy them, because the ground that they're standing on is worth more money to them than the building itself. It's cheaper for them to flatten the Leopard and build new houses and apartments on it than it is for them to reconstruct what was already there. I mean, if they'd have spent the money when it was, I mean, if they could have spent the money on a decent security system, let's be honest, and then none of this would have happened. But because they haven't spent the money on looking after the building and doing it up, which is not what they were going to do anyway. It's the same as all of them. They want them to fall down, bulldoze them, have a nice bit of prime real estate, fire up a crap prefab building with grey windows, job done, sell it for a few million. And I think that's what's going to happen. I mean, I don't know. Come back to me in 10 years' time and let's see what's there. We'll revisit this in 10 years. But I don't think it'll be the Leopard. I don't even know who to talk to. How do you fight for something like this? What can we do? There isn't really a governing body. I mean, what's the punishment for destroying a grade 2 listed building? Well, they didn't technically destroy it, so there is no punishment. Did they not look after it? It's debatable. No one's ever held accountable. The council don't want to get involved. You know, the Heritage Trusts, there's nothing they can do. And it's beyond saving now. So there's just no punishment. If they want to knock it down and build a prefab building, they can, and they will. And unfortunately, unless we start doing something about it, every time this happens, it's just going to keep happening, isn't it? Over and over again. You know, we've got the big house where the floor's rotting out and the windows are falling out. All the oak beams inside are knackered. We've got the Queen's Theatre, which again, stunning building, could be used for a million things, completely falling apart, rot, damp, because no one can do anything about it. And the people that care have got no power. The people that don't care have got the money. It's not a good mix. So yeah, we'll come back to this in 10 years' time and see what was done, see what's left. I hope I'm wrong, because for a history this varied and this long, and for it to have been such a central hub in the city, really, not just in the town, just makes me sad that it's just a smouldering ruin. And it's been a smouldering ruin now for what? Is it 2 years it's been sat like that? And no one's done anything about it. The scaffolding hiding the front, some Harris fencing hiding the back. It's probably full of pigeons and bats. And it's just unloved again. And I hate it. But if anybody's got any suggestions, if anybody's got any ideas on what we could do, even, like I say, just to save the front, just so we don't lose the whole thing. I'd just love to be able to drive down the street and just still see the front of it. Even if the whole thing's not there, I don't think we should lose it all. So if anybody's got any ideas, please do contact me. You can get through to me on my website, which is the Red Haired Stokie. But I'm not keeping my hopes up, judging by the track record of the city. So yeah, on that somber note, I'm going to leave it there. But thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for listening. Do drop us a comment on Facebook or on my website or via email if you do want to get in touch. If you do have any ideas or any history or any anecdotes about the leopard, I'd love to hear from you. But yeah, thank you very much for joining, and I will see you next week. Thank you.